The autumn of 1940 arrived in line with a peculiar kind of silence, the kind that settles over a city when its heartbeat has been forcibly slowed, when the rhythm of daily life has been replaced by the mechanical cadence of occupation. The leaves turned gold and crimson as they always did, falling from the plane trees that lined the boulevards. But fewer feet shuffled through them now. Fewer voices rose in the cafes. Fewer lights burned in the windows after dark. Lion, the proud city of silk and resistance, of Renaissance architecture and revolutionary spirit, had been brought to its knees by an enemy that arrived not with the thunder of bombs, but with the quiet efficiency of bureaucratic conquest. In the heart of the Presque Isle district, where the Rhone and Saône rivers embraced before continuing their separate journeys, stood the Bibliothèque Municipale, the municipal library. It was a building of modest grandeur, constructed in the 19th century with a kind of architectural confidence that assumed civilization would always value knowledge. Tall windows allowed light to flood the reading rooms. Wooden shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, laden with volumes that chronicle human thought across centuries. The smell of old paper and leather bindings created an atmosphere of timeless sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the outside world was supposed to dissolve into the ordered universe of catalogued information. It was here that Marguerite Beaumont spent her days, and it was here that she would wage a war that the occupiers never saw coming. Marguerite was 31 years old, though the war had begun to etch lines around her eyes that made her appear older in certain lights. She had the kind of face that people often described as pleasant rather than beautiful. Soft features, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, dark blonde hair that she wore in a practical bun at the nape of her neck. She dressed in the modest fashion of a woman whose salary came from municipal employment. Simple dresses in muted colors, a cardigan against the autumn chill, sensible shoes that could withstand hours of standing and walking between the stacks. Everything about her appearance suggested exactly what she was supposed to be: a librarian, a keeper of books, a woman whose life revolved around the Dewey Decimal System and overdue notices. The Germans who came to the library, and they did come with surprising frequency, saw exactly what they expected to see: a mousy woman who spoke adequate German with a provincial accent, who helped them locate technical manuals and historical texts with efficient politeness, who stamped their borrowing cards with the same mechanical precision she used for everyone else. They saw someone so thoroughly ordinary, so completely unthreatening, that she barely registered as a person at all. Just a librarian. Just another French civil servant doing her job under the new administration. They had no idea that behind those wire-rimmed glasses, behind that pleasant smile and that helpful demeanor, was a mind that had been trained in ways they couldn't imagine. They didn't know that before the war, Marguerite had studied mathematics at the University of Lyon, that she had a particular gift for patterns and codes, for seeing connections that others missed. They didn't know that her father had been a cryptographer in the First World War, that she had grown up solving puzzles at the dinner table, learning to see language as a series of mathematical relationships. They didn't know that when France fell and the occupation began, Marguerite had made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would use every skill she possessed, every advantage her invisible position gave her, to hurt the enemy in ways they would never trace back to a quiet librarian in Lyon. If you've ever felt invisible, ever been underestimated because of how you look or what you do, then you understand the weapon that Marguerite carried. And if you want to see how one woman turned that invisibility into the most dangerous tool the resistance possessed, then stay with the story. Subscribe now, because what happens next will show you that the most powerful acts of defiance often come from the places no one thinks to look. The library had always been Marguerite's sanctuary, even before the war. As a child, she had spent countless hours in the children's section, devouring fairy tales and adventure stories. As a university student, she had claimed a corner table in the reference room where she worked through complex mathematical proofs, the scratch of her pencil the only sound in the reverent silence. After graduation, when expected academic positions failed to materialize, universities in 1930s France were not eager to hire women mathematicians. She had taken the librarian position with a mixture of disappointment and relief. It wasn't the career she had imagined, but it allowed her to remain surrounded by knowledge, to help others discover the transformative power of books. Then the war came, and everything changed. The German occupation of Lyon began in November 1942. though the city had been under Vichy control since the armistice of 1940. The arrival of German troops transformed the city overnight. Suddenly, there were checkpoints on every major street, patrols in the squares, regulations posted on every corner. The library, as a public institution, was required to cooperate with the occupying forces. German officers and administrators were given full access to the collections. Certain books, those by Jewish authors, those deemed politically dangerous, were to be removed from the shelves and destroyed. The library staff was ordered to assist German personnel with the same courtesy they showed French patrons. Marguerite complied with every order. She removed the banned books, though she hid many of them in the basement rather than burning them. She helped German officers locate the materials they needed. She smiled and nodded and played the role of the obedient civil servant. And all the while, she watched and listened and remembered. The Germans, she quickly realized, were creatures of habit and bureaucracy. They came to the library on predictable schedules. They requested specific types of materials, technical manuals about French infrastructure, maps of the region, industrial directories. They spoke freely in front of her, assuming that even if she understood German, she was too insignificant to matter. They discussed supply routes and troop movements, complained about logistics problems, mentioned the names of officers and units. Marguerite absorbed it all like a sponge, her mind cataloging every detail. And then, in the quiet hours when the library was closed, she began to write. The system she developed was elegant in its simplicity. She created what appeared to be routine library documentation, acquisition lists, cataloging notes, inventory reports. But embedded within these mundane documents were codes that conveyed military intelligence. A book title might indicate a troop movement. A call number could specify a date. The number of copies ordered might represent the size of a convoy. She used a cipher based on the Fibonacci sequence, something her father had taught her years ago, modified with her own mathematical innovations to make it nearly unbreakable without the key. The challenge was getting the information out of the library and into the hands of people who could use it. This was where Marguerite's position became invaluable. Libraries are places of constant movement. Patrons coming and going, books being borrowed and returned, deliveries arriving, staff moving between branches. She began to use the library's interbranch loan system as a courier network. A book sent to another library might contain a coded note tucked between its pages. A return volume might carry intelligence from another resistance cell. The Germans, who monitored mail and telephone communications with obsessive thoroughness, never thought to scrutinize the movement of library books. Marguerite's first coded message was sent in December 1942. It contained information about a German supply depot on the outskirts of Lyon, its location, the schedule of deliveries, the type of materials stored there. She had gleaned the information from a conversation between two Wehrmacht logistics officers who had been searching for maps of the industrial district. They had spoken in German, assuming she couldn't understand, discussing the depot's vulnerability and their frustration with inadequate security. She encoded the information in a cataloging report and sent it via interbranch loan to a library in a neighboring town, where it was picked up by a resistance contact. 3 weeks later, the depot was sabotaged. Fuel supplies intended for German vehicles went up in flames. The enemy's operations in the region were disrupted for days. Marguerite heard about the sabotage through the whispered conversations of library patrons, through the increased German patrols in the streets, through the angry complaint of officers who came to the library looking for maps to help them reroute their supply lines. She showed no reaction, just continued stamping books and filing cards and playing her role. But inside, she felt something she hadn't felt since the occupation began. Hope. She had struck a blow. A small one, perhaps, but real. And if she could do it once, she could do it again. Over the following months, Marguerite refined her system. She recruited 2 other library staff members. Simone, a young assistant who had lost her brother in the fighting, and Claude, an older cataloger whose son was in a German labor camp. They formed a cell of 3, each playing a specific role. Simone handled the physical transfer of coded messages, using her youth and innocent appearance to move through the city without suspicion. Claude maintained contact with resistance networks outside the library, using his position as a cataloger to justify visits to other libraries and archives. And Marguerite continued to gather intelligence, to encode it, and to coordinate their operations. The information they provided was devastatingly effective. Marguerite's mathematical mind allowed her to spot patterns that others missed. When German officers repeatedly requested maps of certain rail lines, she deduced that those lines were being used for military transport and passed the information to resistance saboteurs. When technical manuals about bridge construction were borrowed, she inferred that the Germans were repairing damaged infrastructure and provided details about locations and timelines. When she noticed an increase in requests for medical techs, she correctly guessed that a German field hospital was being established and relayed its location. The resistance used her intelligence to plan ambushes, sabotage operations, and strategic strikes. Supply convoys were attacked. Rail lines were destroyed just before major shipments. Communication facilities were targeted at precisely the right moments. The Germans, baffled by the resistance's seemingly supernatural knowledge of their operations, increased security measures, conducted investigations, and arrested suspected informants. But they never looked at the quiet librarian who helped them find their books. Marguerite's life became a study in duality. By day, she was a helpful civil servant, the woman who knew where every book was shelved, who could locate any piece of information a patron needed. She assisted German officers with the same patient courtesy she showed elderly French scholars. She organized a card catalog with meticulous precision. She enforced the library's rules about silence and proper handling of materials. She was, to all appearances, exactly what she seemed, a woman whose entire world consisted of books and the systems that organized them. But by night, in the small apartment she shared with her aging mother, Marguerite became someone else entirely. She pored over the notes she had made during the day, her mind working through the intelligence she had gathered. She encoded messages using mathematical formulas that she kept in her head, never written down. She planned the next day's operations, deciding which information was urgent enough to risk transmission, which could wait, which contacts to use. She lived in a state of constant vigilance, knowing that a single mistake could mean death not just for herself, but for everyone in her network. The strain was enormous. She lost weight, her already slim frame becoming gaunt. She developed insomnia, lying awake at night replaying conversations, checking her mental calculations, worrying about the dozens of ways her system could be compromised. She jumped at sudden noises. She scrutinized every patron who entered the library, wondering if they were Gestapo agents in disguise. She carried cyanide capsules sewn into the lining of her cardigan, a final escape if capture became inevitable. But she also experienced moments of profound purpose. Every successful operation, every German convoy destroyed, every supply line disrupted. These were victories that gave meaning to the fear and exhaustion. She was fighting back. She was making a difference. The occupation had taken so much from France, from Lyon, from her personally. Her fiancé had been killed in the fighting in 1940. Her brother was in a prisoner of war camp in Germany. Her father had died of a heart attack shortly after the armistice, broken by France's defeat. The library work, the coding, the constant danger, these were her way of honoring their memories, of refusing to accept defeat. The winter of 1943 was particularly brutal. Food was scarce, fuel for heating even scarcer. The library was so cold that patrons kept their coats on while reading. Marguerite's fingers grew numb as she worked, making it difficult to write the tiny coded notations she hid in library documents. The Germans, frustrated by continued resistance activities, increased their reprisals. Public executions became common. The Gestapo arrested people on the slightest suspicion, and those who disappeared into their headquarters on Avenue Berthelot rarely emerged alive. It was during this dark winter that Marguerite obtained her most valuable intelligence yet. A high-ranking German logistics officer, Oberst Friedrich Hartmann, had become a regular visitor to the library. He was a career military man, methodical and humorless, who came twice a week to study maps and transportation schedules. He was planning something significant. Marguerite could tell by the materials he requested, by the intensity of his focus, by the way he took copious notes that he carefully guarded. She began to pay special attention to Hartmann, noting everything he looked at, every map he studied, every question he asked. She observed that he was particularly interested in rail lines running east from Lyon toward the Alps, in bridge capacities and tunnel dimensions, in schedules of civilian train traffic. She noticed that he cross-referenced these materials with German military timetables that he brought with him. Slowly, painstakingly, Marguerite pieced together what Hartmann was planning. The Germans were organizing a major supply operation, a massive shipment of weapons, ammunition, and equipment that would be transported by rail through Lyon to German forces in Italy. The operation was scheduled for late February, using civilian rail lines to disguise the military nature of the transport. It was a brilliant plan, and if successful, it would significantly strengthen German positions in the Italian campaign. Marguerite knew this information was too important to send through normal channels. The risk of interception or delay was too great. She needed to get the intelligence directly to someone who could act on it immediately. But doing so would require breaking her own rules, stepping outside the careful protocols that had kept her safe for over a year. She made the decision on a Tuesday evening, after Hartmann had left the library following another long session with his maps. She would personally deliver the information to a resistance contact, a man named Laurent who operated a printing shop in the Croix-Rousse district. It meant leaving her apartment after curfew, navigating through a city full of patrols and checkpoints, carrying encoded documents that would condemn her instantly if discovered. It was dangerous to the point of suicidal, but the alternative, allowing that supply shipment to reach its destination, was unthinkable. She left her apartment at midnight, dressed in dark clothing, carrying the coded documents hidden in the false bottom of a shopping bag. The streets of Lyon were eerily quiet, lit only by occasional street lamps that cast pools of sickly yellow light. She moved through the shadows, her heart pounding so hard she was certain it could be heard blocks away. Every sound made her freeze: the distant rumble of a truck, the echo of boots on pavement, the bark of a dog. She was 3 blocks from Laurent's shop when she heard the voices, German voices, coming from around the corner ahead. A patrol. She pressed herself into a doorway, barely breathing, as 2 soldiers walked past. They were young, talking about a girl one of them had met, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They passed within feet of her hiding spot without noticing her. She waited until their footsteps faded, then continued, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. She reached the printing shop and knocked on the back door. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 more taps. The signal. Laurent opened the door, his eyes widening in shock when he saw her. "Marguerite, what are you doing here? You should never—" "I have information," she interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "Critical, about a supply operation." She handed him the documents and explained what she had discovered. Laurent's expression grew grave as he listened. If this is accurate, we can stop them. We can destroy the entire shipment." "It's accurate," Marguerite said. "I've verified every detail." "Then you may have just changed the course of the war in this region," Laurent said quietly. "Get home. Quickly. And Marguerite, thank you. What you're doing, it matters more than you know." She made it back to her apartment just before dawn, exhausted and terrified and exhilarated all at once. She had done it. She had delivered the intelligence. Now it was up to others to act on it. The attack came on February 23, 1943. Resistance fighters, coordinating with intelligence from London, sabotaged a rail line just outside Lyon. The German supply train derailed spectacularly, its cargo of weapons and ammunition exploding in a fireball that could be seen across the city. The operation was a complete success. The supplies never reached Italy. German forces there, already struggling, were left critically undersupplied at a crucial moment. The reprisals were swift and brutal. The Germans executed 50 French hostages in retaliation. They increased patrols, conducted house-to-house searches, arrested anyone with even tenuous connections to resistance activities. The Gestapo was everywhere, hunting for the source of the intelligence that had led to the sabotage. Marguerite went to work the next day as usual, her face showing nothing but the mild concern of a civilian worried about the violence in her city. She helped patrons find books, process returns, file catalog cards. When Oberst Hartmann came to the library that afternoon, his face dark with fury. She assisted him with the same polite efficiency she always showed. "The sabotage," he said in German, not bothering to lower his voice. Someone knew. Someone had detailed information about the shipment. "How terrible," Marguerite replied in her accented German, her expression sympathetic. "I hope they catch whoever was responsible." Hartmann stared at her for a long moment, and Marguerite felt her blood turn to ice. Did he suspect? Had she made some mistake, left some trace? But then he turned away, muttering about French terrorists and inadequate security. Just a librarian. Not worth his attention. The close call shook Marguerite badly. She realized that her luck couldn't hold forever, that eventually someone would notice the correlation between library visits and resistance operations. She began to plan for the inevitable, preparing escape routes, memorizing cover stories, making arrangements for her mother's care if she had to flee or was arrested. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The intelligence she provided was too valuable, the impact too significant. Over the following months, her coded notes contributed to dozens of successful operations. German supply lines throughout the region became increasingly unreliable. Convoys were ambushed. Depots were destroyed. Communication networks were disrupted. The occupiers, who had once moved through line with arrogant confidence, became cautious and paranoid, never knowing where the next strike would come from. The library became a hub of resistance activity, though the Germans never realized it. Marguerite expanded her network, carefully recruiting other librarians in other cities, creating a web of intelligence gathering that stretched across occupied France. They communicated through book loans and catalog cards, through seemingly innocent professional correspondence that contained layers of hidden meaning. They became known in resistance circles as les bibliothécaires, the librarians, a network that provided some of the most reliable intelligence the resistance possessed. But success brought increased danger. The Gestapo, frustrated by their inability to stop the resistance operations, intensified their efforts to find informants. They began to pay closer attention to civilian institutions, to look for patterns in how information was flowing. They started monitoring libraries, watching who came and went, noting which books were borrowed. In the spring of 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Normandy, Marguerite received a warning from Laurent. The Gestapo was investigating the library. They hadn't identified her specifically, but they were getting closer. It was time to consider going underground, joining the Maquis resistance fighters in the countryside. Marguerite refused. "If I disappear, they'll know the library was involved. They'll arrest everyone who works here, everyone who's been a regular patron. I can't let that happen. I'll be more careful, but I'm not leaving." "Then you're signing your own death warrant," Laurent said bluntly. "Perhaps," Marguerite replied, "but I'm not done yet." She continued her work, though now with even greater caution. She varied her routines, changed her coding methods, reduced the frequency of transmissions. She prepared for the worst, making sure that if she was arrested, she could hold out long enough under interrogation for her network to scatter and hide. The end came on a Tuesday morning in May 1944. Marguerite was at her desk in the library, processing a stack of returned books, when she noticed them. 3 men in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of Gestapo agents. They weren't browsing the shelves or looking for specific books. They were watching her. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for, dreading, almost expecting for so long. She reached into her cardigan pocket, her fingers finding the small capsule sewn into the lining. One bite, and it would be over in seconds. No interrogation, no torture, no risk of breaking and betraying her network. But then she thought of her mother, who would have to identify her body. She thought of Simone and Claude, who would be arrested immediately if she died under suspicious circumstances. She thought of all the intelligence still locked in her mind, all the operations that would be compromised if she took the easy way out. She removed her hand from her pocket and stood up as the Gestapo agents approached. "Marguerite Beaumont?" one of them asked in French. "Yes. You will come with us. Now." She didn't resist. She didn't run. She simply nodded, removed her glasses and placed them carefully on her desk, and walked out of the library between the two agents. The last thing she saw was Simone's horrified face, and she gave the younger woman the slightest shake of her head. Don't react. Don't give them any reason to suspect you, too. The Gestapo headquarters on Avenue Berthelot was a place of nightmares. Marguerite was taken to a small interrogation room. Bare walls, a single table, 2 chairs, a drain in the floor that she tried not to think about. They left her there for hours, a classic intimidation tactic. She used the time to prepare herself mentally, to review her cover story, to steel herself for what was coming. When the interrogator finally arrived, he was not what she expected. No shouting, no immediate violence. Just a middle-aged man with tired eyes who sat across from her and opened a file folder. Mademoiselle Beaumont, he said in perfect French, we know you've been passing information to the resistance. We know about the coded messages in library documents. We know about the inter-branch loan system. We know everything. It was a bluff. It had to be. If they knew everything, she would already be dead. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice steady. I'm a librarian. I catalog books. You're a traitor, he replied calmly, and you will tell us everything. The names of your contacts, the details of your network, the codes you use. You will tell us, Mademoiselle Beaumont. The only question is how much pain you'll endure first. The interrogation lasted for 3 days. Marguerite told them nothing. They beat her, burned her, broke her fingers one by one. They showed her photographs of her mother, threatened to arrest her, to torture her. They promised her mercy if she cooperated, death if she didn't. Through it all, Marguerite remained silent, retreating into a place in her mind where the pain couldn't reach, where she was back in a library surrounded by books, where mathematics was just beautiful patterns and not the foundation of codes that had killed German soldiers. On the 4th day, everything changed. The interrogator came into the room with a different expression. Confusion, anger, something else she couldn't identify. You're being released, he said abruptly. Marguerite, barely conscious, thought she had misheard. What? Released? There's been a mistake. You're free to go. She learned later what had happened. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The invasion had begun, and suddenly the German occupation forces in France had far more pressing concerns than one suspected librarian in Lyon. Resources were being redirected, personnel reassigned. The investigation into the library network was deemed a low priority and quietly shelved. Marguerite had been saved not by her own resistance to interrogation, though that had bought crucial time, but by the tide of history turning against her captors. She was released onto the streets of Lyon, barely able to walk, her hands bandaged and useless. Simone found her and took her to a safe house, where resistance doctors treated her injuries. She spent 2 weeks recovering, learning to use her broken hands again, processing the trauma of what she had endured. By the time she was well enough to move, Lyon was in chaos. The Germans were preparing to retreat. The resistance was emerging from the shadows, openly fighting in the streets. The liberation was coming. Marguerite returned to the library in September 1944, after Lyon had been freed. The building had been damaged in the fighting. Windows broken, some shelves toppled, books scattered across the floors. But it was still standing, still there. She spent the next weeks helping to restore order, to repair the damage, to return the library to its proper function. She never spoke publicly about her resistance work. When people asked what happened to her hands, why they were scarred and didn't work quite right anymore, she said simply that she had been arrested by mistake and released. Just a librarian who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But those who knew, those who had been part of the network, understood what she had done. The intelligence she had provided had contributed to dozens of successful operations, had saved countless lives, had helped to cripple German supply lines at critical moments. Her coded notes, hidden in library documents that the enemy never thought to scrutinize, had been weapons as effective as any bomb or bullet. Marguerite Beaumont lived until 1987, spending the rest of her life working in libraries, first in Lyon and later in Paris. She never married, never had children. Her broken hands made certain tasks difficult, but she adapted, finding new ways to do the work she loved. She received several medals after the war, recognition of her resistance activities, but she kept them in a drawer and rarely spoke of them.